Unfortunately, many of us are faced with the reality that any day could be our last. And due to recent events, I felt that I should share a personal story that I think a lot of you guys would benefit from. And that is, how did I respond to a shooting incident that could have affected me? I want to disclose that this was not an active shooter scenario, and it seemed to be an isolated incident. But I want to talk about what was going on through my mind during the event and some things that maybe need to be talked about afterwards. I also want to disclose that this was not an incident that directly involved me. I was just near the incident with zero involvement. I do not condone violence, and I pray that none of you guys have to experience anything relatively similar. But being negligent to the possibility of this happening only hurts you and those dear to you. So in this video, I want to talk about some misconceptions when it comes to scenarios like this and some mindset changes that I've personally made because of this. Before we get too far in the video, I'd like to say thank you to our channel sponsor, Obsidian Tactics. Obsidian Tactics is an online retailer that offers a curated selection of high quality and high value products that have been vetted throughout the two-way community. A lot of the items they offer are well-known brands that you may already be looking to purchase. So go visit Obsidian Tactics for all your two-way needs and wants. All right, back to the video. So before I share my short story, I want to be honest about why I want to talk about this. And that's because American Outlaw released a video about how his daughter got caught in an active shooter situation. And I have mad respect for how he reacted to that situation. But then it got me thinking about how I reacted when I felt like my life might be in danger. I feel like a lot of us think we know what we're gonna do in those situations, but you'll never really know until it actually happens. One thing I definitely had a misconception about this was that I would react as fast as I train. I say this because when you're on the range, you have one task to focus on, and that's shooting. We make ready and we fire on the beep or whatever other stimulus you decide to use. But when you're out in the real world, your main focus isn't on a distinguishable target or threat. Let's use walking through your local downtown as an example. When you're on the sidewalk, you'll hear cars driving by, people hanging out at the park, and even music coming from various restaurants or bars. So when you hear a loud audible bang, your first reaction isn't gonna be, is somebody shooting at me? For me, when I heard gunshots, it did take me a second to process that familiar sound, because you kind of fight to believe that those noises are happening in a populated environment. For those that follow the channel, you know I love to train, and it's one of my favorite things to do. And I always say you want to be overqualified for the worst day of your life. But every time I ever thought of a self-defense situation, I've always imagined it was me versus the shooter. But in this instance, I was with my girlfriend as well as my friend and his wife. And that completely changed the dynamic. Because not only did I feel like I was responsible for my own safety, but I had 3 other lives to take into consideration when making decisions. So with that being said, I'm gonna share my story real quick because it's not a super long one. So last year, my girlfriend and I decided to go to Savannah, Georgia with my friend and his wife. It was just a small vacation we decided to plan since it's been a while since we've been to that city. Now, growing up, Savannah was a pretty quiet and peaceful place, but due to its growing popularity, people have been moving there and becoming permanent residents. And from my experience, the more people you have in one area introduces a little bit more problems than you would in a lower population area. So during the second night in Savannah, we decided to go to a restaurant that was on a rooftop. And we were having a great time taking photos and eating some pretty fancy desserts. My friend and I were sitting on this outdoor couch just talking about random stuff. And in the middle of our conversation, 5 shots broke out. Now, mind you, we were outside on a rooftop restaurant that was only a few stories up. So when we heard these 5 shots, it wasn't clear on how close they were and where they came from. But in that instance, the entire restaurant went quiet. I want to say for about a second or a second and a half, I was processing on what just happened. And I don't want to sit here and pretend like I'm John Wick. I didn't have a particular plan set on what I would do if this were to happen in this particular location. But I do remember the first thing that went through my head. Because we're on a rooftop, there is only one way in and one way out. And I remember turning my head and staring at the door, just waiting. The shots didn't come from the inside of the restaurant, but they sounded close enough to be a concern. And as I stared at the door, a flood of other thoughts start to pour into my head. First one being, where are my people? Fortunately enough, we were all sitting together, so I didn't have to think about that for too long. My second thought was, where can we go? And like I mentioned before, I came to the conclusion that there was only one way in and one way out of here. And this brought me to my third thought. I cannot hesitate if whoever shot those shots comes through that door, because this is life or death. And this was the most difficult part to think through, because this isn't the range. You can't just send lead in one direction with a margin of error. There are a ton of people in this restaurant, and I have no control over who decides to stand up or to run and move in front of my line of sight. And another hard thing I had to consider was, how fast can I draw without putting my own life at risk? When shots are fired, you do not want to immediately pull your gun out in the hopes of defending yourself, because you can easily be mistaken as the shooter. So walking around with a firearm in your hand is the last thing I wanted to do. So it really came down to positioning myself in a way that I can have the most amount of time to draw my firearm and to get my first shots off without putting others in danger. And as I was processing this last thought, the silence was broken with a ton of police sirens. Long story short, this was an isolated incident that happened near us, but in the moment, you don't know that, and you're forced to act accordingly. This was definitely the closest I've ever had to come to actually pulling and firing my concealed carry weapon. But after I reflected on what happened, there was something that did surprise me. Now, I want to explain this in the most humble and honest way possible, because I don't ever want to portray myself for somebody that I'm not. But during this process, not once did I think, can I take the shot? And that brought a whole new level of confidence if I was ever to be forced in this situation again. Shooting is a very strong hobby of mine, and I love competing and pushing myself every day. And sometimes when you go to matches, you'll be forced to shoot at targets that are 5 yards away all the way out to 100 yards away. And because of that, I've gotten familiar with shooting at further distances. The entrance to the restaurant was roughly about 20 yards away, and I can easily say that was in my comfort zone. Again, there are a lot of variables that come to play when you have to protect yourself in a public environment, such as other people. But the process of defending myself at that distance wasn't something I was scared of. And I can only attribute that to my training. And then the second thing that I actually took away from this also comes from competing, and that was my stress management. I can only speak for myself in this instance, but I was pretty stressed out and a bit anxious. I mean, we're literally talking about life or death of you or your loved ones, but at no point did that hold me back from thinking clearly or feeling like I couldn't act accordingly if push came to shove. And this is where I connected the dots between what happened and competing. If you've never shot a competition, then you might not understand this next part, but ask anyone in the comments what they felt on their first match. You are going to feel very stressed, at least for the first couple of matches. And even to this day, I still feel a certain level of stress when I shoot matches. But the more you do it, the more familiar that feeling becomes. And because of that, now when I compete, I never let it overpower my thinking or my motor skills. And I thought that was pretty cool how that translated over to real life. And I think it's very important to talk about this stuff because you always think you know what you'll do until it actually happens. And now my whole mindset on the matter has adapted according to what I experienced. I am no longer running that scenario through my head with just me and the shooter. Now I think about people being with me. At the end of the day, there's a lot to this. And I definitely encourage you guys to look up active shooter training because there are guys out there that train this on a daily basis. But remember, you definitely want to vet who you're getting training from. So don't just go blindly signing up for a class if you know nothing about who is instructing you. But yeah, I just wanted to share this with you guys because I think it's very important to share these stories no matter the magnitude of the situation. If you guys have any instances similar to this, please share that down below. I really think it's important for others to see how quickly things like this can happen and how others have reacted when put in those tough spots. I pray no one ever has to lose their life to violence, but protecting innocent lives is something all men should strive for. So make sure you get out and train this week, not only for you, but for the sake of others. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. As always, I'll catch you guys in the next one.